Well, we're certainly happy to have John with us this evening. John Newman is CEO and co-founder of the New Hope Community Development of Acadiana, a faith-based monitoring organization that provides empowering adults for 50 at-risk children in Lafayette. He and his wife, Christine, started New Hope 8 years ago. The mentoring organization currently offers an after-school tutoring program and scouting program, STEM club, and 6-week summer program in partnership with the City Parks and Recreation Department. Although John works directly with children 3 days each week as the CEO of New Hope, he is primarily responsible for all business aspects of the organization. Much of the time is spent on developing partnership with civic organizations, churches, and local businesses. Board recruitment and development is another one of his responsibilities. He has worked hard to recruit pastors, civic leaders, professors, and business leaders for their board. John is an organization chief, fundraiser, grant writer, and volunteer recruiter. Prior to serving as a New Hope, John had served as a Protestant pastor for over 20 years, Protestant pastor for 20 years in New York, Wisconsin, and most recently in Lafayette, Louisiana. While living on an island for nearly a decade, John worked banking and financial service industry. At that time, John was very active in politics and served as a precinct captain for the Iowa caucuses and as a country chairman for a U.S. Senate race. John has been happily married to his ministry partner, Christine Newman, for over 30 years. Together, they have 5 adult children, 3 of whom have already graduated ULL and 2 of which are still in college. For fun, John enjoys playing designer board games, savoring a craft beer with friends occasionally, and studying, discussing theology, history, and sociology. We appreciate you being here this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Looking forward.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here with you all, and my objective today is just to share my story. As my bio mentioned, my training isn't in education. I didn't have a background in sociology. I'm not an educational or a child researcher. 8 years ago, my background is a Protestant minister. That's what I did most of my adult life. And 8 years ago, when my wife and I felt led to start this after-school program, working with at-risk kids in the north side of town, we didn't have that training. We just felt, hey, there's a big need in our town for this, and we felt led to start an organization. And I guess what I want to share with you is what we've learned along the journey. So that first year, we were at the very low end of the learning curve, and we learned a lot. So we have 5 children of our own. During my wife's 30 years of ministry, most of her ministry's been with children. She's served as a teacher both in preschool and elementary. She's been a children's pastor. And then we had 5 of our own kids. When we started in 2011, that first fall, we realized that the kids we were dealing with in the Azalea Park neighborhood were significantly different than our own kids. One of the things we noticed is when they first got to our building, they were loud and boisterous. They would come in and they always make a scene. When they would sit at the table, they'd take their backpack, take it off, throw it up in the air and make a big sound. They're singing, they're whatever. And then when you're trying to work with them, they had a very difficult time staying focused. You would get them to work on one thing, and then you would turn to help the other student, and before you know it, that other student, he just left. Where did Ron Training go? He was just working on his math assignment. So the behaviors really surprised us. The thing that was most shocking was the behavior on the playground. And what we saw on the playground almost every week, without fail, there was at least one playground fight. And there was one day that really made an impression on me. I came out to the playground after we were done with our homework. The kids would go outside and play. And when I got to the playground, I was pleasantly surprised to see there was nobody fighting. I was thinking, oh wow, we're making headway, we're making progress here. But then I saw one little boy, I think he was about a second grader. He had his arms crossed, folded, and he was saying by his posture, I am disengaged, I am not going to play with these children, and there's nothing you can do to get me to play on this playground. So I walked over to him, and I approached him from the side. So I thought I was in his peripheral vision. I wasn't trying to startle him. But when I got to him, I put my arm on his shoulder. And when he felt my arm on his shoulder, he turned like this with his fist clenched. He was ready to fight. And I realized, oh my goodness, these kids are really under stress. What's going on here? But before we saw the behavioral things, on their very first day of tutoring, we had a little kindergarten boy. So he had his first day of kindergarten, and my wife knew the names of the kids, so for this young man, Tanner, she had a little tracing sheet, so he would trace the letters of his name and practice penmanship, practice writing, start learning his letters. This young man had no fine motor skills. When he grabbed his pencil, his hand was literally shaking, and it looked like he had palsy by the way he was writing. No fine motor skills at all. We had 2 4th grade students. Both of them were learning long division, and we discovered that neither one of them knew simple addition. The one boy was working on his spelling words. He had 15, 18 spelling words. It took him approximately 20 minutes to 25 minutes to be able to pronounce his spelling words. What we saw was these kids aren't just a little behind. Because, I mean, we were thinking, Chris and I were thinking, well, man, we've done it with the kids, we've done it with our kids, we've done it with church kids. How hard can this be? You know, if they're a little behind with math, we can help them catch up. A little bit behind with reading, we'll read with them. No problem. We got this licked. We saw these kids were tremendously behind. They were 3 or 4 years behind. And so I started doing some research. I started looking up research on education, research on poverty, trying to understand what was going on with these kids. In your little handout, your first little picture there shows what influences kids' performance the most. If you watch politicians and the talking heads and the news media, the whipping boy is the teachers and the schools. But there's all kinds of research that show that actually schools and teachers account for a very small percentage of a child's performance, academic performance. According to Goldhaber's study in 2010, a teacher accounts for about 6% of a child's performance, whether it's good or bad. 6%. According to that same study, the school accounts for 14% of how well a child does. So the school environment is actually more important than the classroom environment. I mean, that's a little surprising to me. But if you're a teacher and you don't have the support of the administration and there's discipline problems, I can see where a school could be more problematic than a teacher. But note, what is the thing that is the most important factor? Almost 50% of out-of-school factors account for how well a kid does in school. So let me ask you, what do you think the out-of-school factors might be that contribute to either how well a child might do or how poorly? Any ideas?
Hunger.
Hunger? Come to school hungry?
Parental employment.
Parental involvement?
Employment, yes.
Oh, parental employment? Okay. Now, why would parental employment be a factor?
It determines the living standards that the family is under, and that could lead to a lot of stress or a lack of it.
Okay. All right. Well, the one thing that I did discover is that the families that we're working with, almost every one of the parents works. We have, all I can think of is 2 grandparents who aren't employed, who are the guardians of 4 or 5 of our kids. One grandma is disabled. She worked in the cafeteria of a hospital until she was about 50, and now she's unable to work. She's almost unable to walk. And the other grandma is legally blind. And those are the only 2 that I'm aware of that don't work. The one thing that has surprised me is all these parents work. They all work. They're in poverty because they lack the skill sets for higher paying jobs. So, well, what I discovered was the number one factor that's correlated with a child's performance in school is the socioeconomic status of their parents. There is no other single factor more closely associated with how well a child's going to do in school than the socioeconomic status of the parents. If you look at that first graph, this is a graph of Louisiana school performance based on free lunches. So if you're familiar with the free lunch program, if you go to a public school, you can either pay full pay. If your income is middle class or better, you're going to pay for your lunch. If you're lower income, the state will subsidize your child's lunch and you'll pay a portion of it. If you're in poverty, the state will pay for all of your lunch. So the free lunch program is the threshold for that is a little higher than the federal poverty rate, but it's a good proxy for poverty. And this is the performance of schools in Louisiana, I believe around 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. And so if you look at this graph, if the school has less than 1/3 of its children who are getting free lunch, or less than 1/3 of its children who live in poverty, that school on the school performance scores is going to get an A. So in other words, the kids took the standardized test at the end of the year. Those kids get an A because they did well on their test. The school gets an A. Okay? If you go up to have about 45% of your kids on free lunch, your school goes from an A school to a B school in the state of Louisiana. And then if you have 90% of your student population on the free lunch program, your school is going to be an F school. Now the researcher who did this analysis a few years prior, what he did was he did a demographic analysis of all the schools in the state, all the public schools in the state, and he predicted what their school performance scores would be and what the LEAP standardized test would be at the end of the year. He was able to predict the average standardized test score of every school within 2%. Basically what this is telling us is, for the most part, we don't need the LEAP test. We don't need a standardized test to tell you how well the kids are going to do. Tell me the demographics. Tell me what the socioeconomic status is of the kids in your school, and I will tell you how well that school will be doing. So in essence, we don't really have an education problem. We have a child poverty problem in our country. And in the state of Louisiana, 28% of our kids are growing up in poverty. Did you know that? 28% of our kids in Louisiana are growing up in poverty. Under the age of 5, it's 33%. So we have a child poverty problem that's growing because we're having kids in poverty having more kids. This is a growing problem, a compounding problem. Then the next little graph is the 4th grade standardized test. And the lighter color bars, that is private school, and the darker color bars are public school. As you can see from that, it really doesn't matter if you're in public school or private school in the state of Louisiana. What matters is your social economic status. It doesn't matter. Public schools are doing, actually the public schools are actually doing a little bit better than the private schools when it comes to educating poor kids. That's what this graph says. Now notice the point spread between full pay, say middle class kids, and free lunch kids. That's about a 30-point spread. If you were to go to the NEAP website, it will tell you that every 10 points of standardized testing equals 1 year of learning. And so what this graph is telling me is something that I found out accidentally. That by 4th grade, a kid in poverty is 3 years behind his middle class peers. I was shocked when I saw that in our program, but this is true throughout the state of Louisiana and throughout the country. This correlation between economics and academic performance, it's true here in Lafayette, it's true in Louisiana, it's true in Wisconsin, it's true in New York, it's true in Amsterdam, Holland. This is something that all researchers are aware of. So let me just tell you what some of the effects of poverty are on kids, what we know. That by age 2, children growing up in poverty are 6 months behind in verbal skills. Which is fascinating because the verbal centers of the brain don't start working and you don't start language until about 1 year old. And so from age of 1 year old to 2 years old, the gap has gone 6 months out in a 1 year time frame. By 3rd grade, the vocabulary of children growing up in poverty is about 25 to 35% less than those growing up middle class. By age 4, kids growing up in poverty are 18 months behind developmentally. By age 4. So by the time they go to kindergarten, they're 2 years behind their academic peers. The gaps start off big and they grow. And if I had known this, I wouldn't have been surprised that the little boy couldn't trace his name. See, the thing I didn't know before we started our program was kids in poverty, they don't have puzzles. Their parents don't buy them puzzles to put together. They don't have crayons. They don't have coloring books. They don't have markers. For most kids growing up in poverty, the first day they've ever held a pencil is the first day of school. I didn't know that. The dropout rate in Lafayette is about 70%. But here locally and nationally, the dropout rate for kids in poverty is 50%. What happens if you're a young man and you're 18 years old and you dropped out of school? What are your future prospects? You're going to be a street pharmacist. The street pharmacists are busy recruiting other street pharmacists. So, all right, so what is it about poverty that creates these gaps? Initially, some of my thoughts would have been some of your thoughts that, hey, it's the parents don't care. Maybe you think that if the parents were working, it's like, well, what I found out is the parents do care, and most of the parents are working. So what are the issues? Well, we tend to have the word poverty is just sort of a broad brush that we paint things with. And I guess I want to give you 2 forms of poverty. There's situational poverty. And situational poverty would be, hey, I lost my job, I got laid off, there's an economic downturn, there was a flood, took out my house, I don't have enough money to fix it all up. But a person in situational poverty, before that event happened, they had the skills to be self-sufficient. Mark Twain had an adage, I'm sure most of you have heard it. Give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man how to fish, he'll fish for a lifetime. If you're in situational poverty, you know how to fish. But right now, you don't have a place to live because your house got flooded out, you don't have any food, and you need some money because your work is also closed because it got flooded out. And so for a few days, a few weeks, maybe a few months, you need some fish. You need some fish. You know how to fish, but right now, you don't have any fish. And situational poverty, you need fish. And what we call that kind of charity, we call that kind of charity relief. We give them meals, we give them a bed, we help them out for the time they need assistance. Generational poverty is different. And what I'm going to say, I want you to listen to real carefully. People in generational poverty do not have the skill set to escape generational poverty. People in generational poverty don't have the skill set to escape generational poverty. Well, what are the skill sets? Well, I'll give you a few. Emotional skills. If you're growing up in poverty and somebody on the playground pushes you, what you gonna do? You're gonna clock them, right? So, what do parents in poverty teach their kids about difficult emotional situations? What do they teach them? Get the first lick in. Get the first lick in. Now, how does that work out in school? Right? How does that work out in the workforce? Now, if you're growing and that is your value from age 3 to age 18, how are you going to hold a job? Nobody has given you any other skill sets. A few years ago, near the beginning of the school year, there was some stuff going on in their neighborhood. I don't really know all the stuff that was going on, but there was some bad blood. And we had to actually call the police to be at our center when our kids got there and when our kids went home, because there were people waiting off the school bus and at the end of tutoring looking for people to beat up on after tutoring. So, well, the police came, things sort of died down a little bit, and then a few weeks later, we heard the story that 2 kids who had been sassing each other all day at school were jawing at each other on the school bus. They went home, they got mama, both of them got mama, and the moms came to the park and fought. One got arrested and one went to the hospital. Those are the emotional skills that our kids are being taught if they're growing up in our neighborhood. We had 2 boys, and they were sort of like the odd couple, Josiah and Jaeric. Jaeric, he was 2nd grade, but he was ripped, man. He had like a 6-pack. He's a 2nd grader. He had biceps, but he was also really, really smart. And then Josiah, smart kid, but he was a nerd. He was like me. He was a bookworm and a nerd. Okay, but they were friends. I don't know why they got along, but you know, they were always walking off the school bus together. They were always sitting together. They were great friends. Over Thanksgiving break, we come back, and I see Josiah, I high-five him, and he's all happy. I see Jaeric, I high-five him. Then I get back in the building, and Josiah has his head on the table. And I ask him, Josiah, what happened? Well, over the Thanksgiving break, he tells me the story of what happened. At tutoring, Jaeric pushed him and called him a name. Okay. They got in a little kerfuffle over Thanksgiving break. They were playing football, and Jaeric was on one team, Josiah was on another team. Josiah dropped a couple passes, and kids were teasing him, and then he dropped a touchdown pass. And then everybody was teasing him, and then Jaeric joined in the teasing. And so then Josiah wallops Jaeric, which is not a good thing, because Jaeric, he is an athlete, and so he wallops Josiah. Well, the sisters see that, and the sisters start fighting. And what ends up happening was that over Thanksgiving break, there was sort of a Hatfield and McCoy's thing between the 2 families. Things were escalating beyond the children to the parents, and parents are calling for neighbors to be on sides. This is what's going on in our neighborhood. We have had people move out of our neighborhood because they got too dangerous because their kids got in a fight. started keying the cars, throwing things through windows, and things kept escalating. So both of them told me the exact same story. Nobody's trying to say, oh, Josiah did it, Josiah. No, they both told me the exact same story. And I talked to them separately, and I asked both of them, I said, I think the other guy wants to be your friend. What do you think? He said, yeah, I think so. I said, can you think of anything you could have done differently? Yeah. I said, well, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what you're going to say, and tomorrow I want you to apologize for what you did. This is not a skill set these kids have learned. Nobody has taught them this. So the next day they come and they're, Mr. John, we got to do it. And it's like, I talked to him in the beginning of the tutoring day, the day before, and so much had happened in the last 24 hours, I forgot about what we were going to do that day. And I said, well, we got to do it. Do what? It's like, we have to do the talking thing. It's, oh, yeah, you got to apologize. And so Josiah says, Jarek, I got mad, and I should have just left. They were teasing me, I got mad. You're my friend. Even though you were teasing me, I shouldn't have hit you. And I'm sorry I hit you. And Jarek says, those kids, they're acquaintances. You're my friend. And it's my football. I should have left with my football and just played catch with you. I don't need them. Josiah, I'm sorry I wasn't a better friend. These are skill sets that need to be taught. And you know what? The rest of the year, those kids sat next together. They worked together. They played together. But that's because somebody gave them a skill set of how to apologize and how to accept an apology. Educational skills. Our parents can't help our kids with third grade reading and third grade math. That is why they send our kids to our tutoring program. They either can't because they're working late and they get home at 8 o'clock and they're exhausted, or we have blind grandmas or people who are functionally illiterate and they are unable to. One of our first report card parties, 2 or 3 moms and grandmas came to me and said, Mr. John, we're so thankful that you guys are here. We could help them with addition, but when it got to multiplication, I couldn't help them anymore. The parents don't know how to help their kids educationally. Spiritual tools. We're a faith-based organization. We don't teach this to our kids during our tutoring time because the city's letting us use the building, but when we visit the kids, when we are on outings with the kids, when we get to talk to them afterwards, we tell them 2 things. We tell them God loves them and He's got a plan for your life. Because these kids need to know they're loved and valuable, and they have to know there's a reason for their existence. Now, even if you're not a faith-based person, every human being has to believe they're valuable and has to believe they can contribute something to society. Our first year, almost every student would come up to us and say, Mr. John, I'm bad. Mr. John, I'm dumb. It's like, Rontrey, man, you're not bad. You made a bad choice, man. Tell me, what's a different way you could have handled that? See? So now you know how to handle that better. Rontrey, you're not dumb. You just don't know how to do long division. Man, we're going to learn multiplication. We're going to learn addition. We're going to learn subtraction. Then you're going to learn long division. You can get this. We're going to do this, and we're going to stick this out till we get this done together. Our kids don't have hope and optimism. It's never going to get better. I'm bad. I'm not worthy. Our kids need people who are going to breathe life into them. Poverty is caustic. It is so negative. They can't. The parents don't think they can do anything that can change their situation. The kids don't think they can do anything that's going to change their situation. Until you can breathe hope into these kids. And you know what? They're going to have to borrow your hope because they don't have any. We had some tutors once to say, man, this gal, she's just given up. It's like, right, she's given up. That's why you are here, so she doesn't give up. You have to give her a reason to keep pushing on. You're supposed to breathe life into her. That is why you're here. So, those are some of the skill sets. There are others. But basically, the children we're dealing with, they need to be taught how to fish. They need to be taught skill sets that are not taught in their home, aren't taught in the neighborhood, and they're things that you and I take for granted because they were instilled in us by our parents at a very early age, and we don't even know that we have these skills. We assume everybody has them, but these kids don't. And without these skills, they're not going to succeed. The one thing I've seen about kids who escape poverty, the one common thread that they almost all have is there was a middle-class adult, a teacher, a priest, a pastor, a coach, who reached out and mentored that child and showed them another way. They need somebody who's going to teach them how to fish. The last thing I want to share with you about the adverse effects of poverty is something called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. ACEs is one way to measure stress in a child's life. And I would encourage you to do some research on it. It's on the federal health website. I forgot what that's called, but whatever the national health website is, you can look up ACEs, and it'll show you what the effects are. The more ACEs you have, the more significant the problems. If you look at the little chart, if you have 1 or 2 ACEs, it's a 10-point scale. If you have 1 or 2 ACEs, you're going to see kids that are going to have social connection problems, they're going to have behavioral problems, and cognitive impairment. So you start off with 1 or 2 ACEs, your IQ has probably been hurt by about 6 points. You start getting 3 or 4 ACEs, your IQ is going to be hurt by about 15 points. You start getting 3 or 4 ACEs, you're going to see risky behavior in children. You're going to start seeing dread diseases and disability. What they've found is ACEs, stress, changes the brain's architecture, the blood flow to the brain, because the way the blood flow is working, instead of it going to the prefrontal cortex where we make all our decisions, all our working memory is, it goes to your lymphatic system, and you're always in fight mode. And the prefrontal lobe is 6% smaller in kids growing up in poverty. It changes how the genes are ordered. It changes what genes are expressed or not expressed. Stress does that. So one of the things that's expressed is that kids in poverty, they look like they have ADHD. So I'm sure you've heard about Ritalin and Adderall being prescribed to low-income children. Overprescribed. They don't have ADHD. You're masking the problem. The kids that we saw that were loud and boisterous couldn't sit still. They'd be pounding the pencil on the table, their legs bouncing up and down under the table, couldn't sit still. That's stress. That's stress. You don't need Adderall. What you need is a safe, loving environment. You do that and the stress goes away. Miss Ella was telling me, or mentioning tonight to someone else, that at New Hope, she could see the kids are happy. When we first started out, we didn't understand this thing with ACEs. So we focused on education. We focused, they don't know their phonics, well, let's teach them their phonics. They don't know their math facts, let's teach them their math facts. You know what we accidentally did? We added stress to those kids' life. We were stressing them out. And so we've gone from being an educational after-school tutoring program to a mentoring program. And you know what a good day is for us at New Hope? When at the end of the day, my wife and I, we can sit down and look at each other, and yeah, maybe we didn't get homework done, or maybe this thing happened or that thing happened. But at New Hope, it's a good day if we know that all the kids went home and they felt loved at New Hope today. Here's what we found out. That when we started focusing on mentoring and creating relationships, loving relationships between our volunteers and our kids, the first thing that changed was behavior at our program. 6 months later, behavior started changing at the schools. And the first year we did this, at the end of the school year, 80% of our kids were getting A's and B's in conduct. Let me tell you, the year before that, 3 or 4 of them were getting expelled from school. So the behavioral change wasn't just in our program, but it was being carried over into school life. 2 years, we didn't do the numbers for last year, but 2 years ago, 95% of our kids were getting A's and B's in conduct. That loving environment settles their souls to such a point that it has long-term impact, not just at our tutoring site, but at school as well. So, a lot I could say about ACEs, but the one thing I will say is if you have 6 or more ACEs, your life expectancy is cut by 20 years. State of Florida did an inventory, an ACE inventory of every juvenile in juvenile detention. The average ACE score was 4.5. Less than 2% of the juveniles in detention in the state of Florida, less than 2% had no ACEs. I can tell you if you're going to be in juvenile hall just by the number of ACEs you felt in your life. You can predict it. So what are the answers? And so I'm going to offer you 3 answers. And the first one is we need to think about mentors, not teachers. And we call our mentors admiring adults. You can see what we think an admiring adult is. An admiring adult is somebody who creates a safe environment, listens to the child. Most kids don't feel listened to by adults, but our kids in particular don't feel like anybody cares what they have to say. An admiring adult encourages a kid. You can do this. I'm going to help you. It removes all the obstacles, and our kids need a vision for tomorrow. They need to know who God created them to be. And they need somebody who's going to hold up a mirror to them and say, did you know that you're really good at art? This isn't normal. Not everybody can do this. You are really good at math. Man, you were behind. Now we've worked with you, and now you're really good at this. And now you're helping other kids. Man, you're good. They have nobody who's looking at what they're good at. Nobody's holding a vision for, man, you could do this. I think you could do STEM. I think you could be an engineer. Just a little while ago, a 7th grader said to me, I asked her what she wanted to be. She said, I want to be a dental hygienist. Now this girl was like straight A's and everything. But you know, all she knew was the families in her neighborhood were dental hygienists or, you know, laboratory techs or whatever. Not demeaning that, though those are good work. But this girl was very, very smart. And so I said to her, why wouldn't you want to be a dentist? She stood back for a second. It's like, I never thought about that. The thought never even entered her mind. Dentist, wow. I asked her a week later, I said, so what do you want to be when you grow up? She smiled, looked at me and said, I want to be a dentist. Our kids need somebody who's going to cast a vision for a preferred future for them. Next thing, think of second idea. Think early intervention, not juvenile justice. Early intervention. The longer you wait, the harder it is. The elasticity of the brain shrinks. By age 10, your IQ is your IQ. There's nothing you can do to change that. If you want to teach somebody a foreign language, teach it to them when they're 2, when they're 3, right? You want to be a hockey star, put the skates on them when they're 3, right? The longer you wait, the harder it is. By the time the kids are in 4th grade, their educational fate is pretty much sealed. If they're not nationally, if they're not at grade level reading, if they're not at grade level math by 4th grade, they're 15 times more likely to drop out than middle class peers. 15 times more likely. So, but we know that if we intervene early, and if kids are exposed to early education, or early preschool, then instead of entering kindergarten 2 years behind, they can enter school 2 years ahead. And the research has shown that those are lasting effects. That if kids have 2 or 3 years of preschool that have grown up in poverty, and they are taught new ways of socializing, they're given new skills at that early age, and 40 hours a week, they're in a different environment, They're going to be much more likely to graduate high school. They're going to be much more likely to have a job, much more likely to not have been arrested. Why wouldn't we want to invest in early education for these kids? Juvenile diversionary programs, they work great. They work great. In Lafayette, our diversionary programs, we take nonviolent offenders, teach them some job skills, help them get their GEDs, do parental counseling with the parents, and the recidivism rate goes from 60% of returning to jail in 5 years to about 15%. That works great. But what works better is get them when they're 3. Get them when they're 3. And the last is, think about neighborhoods, not schools. And what I mean by this is there's an old saying that says it's not what you know, it's who you know. Right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. My kids they're all going to college. They're all going to graduate from college. Some of them are working on their PhDs. But if one of my kids dropped out of school, I could have helped them find a job. Dispatcher for a trucking company, work for, Lowe's. I could have found somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody could hook my kid up with a job. Most of us, when our kids were growing up, we could have helped hook them up with somebody who would give them a shot. There's nobody that would speak up for these kids and give these kids a chance. I'm going to share with you a little experiment that was done in the 70s. It wasn't meant as an experiment, and they didn't do the research until after the fact, so we don't know all the results. But I would encourage you to look up the GOTRO project. And it's spelled French, not Cajun, so there's no X at the end of the name, but it's GOTRO. And GOTRO was a townhouse developer in Chicago. And in the 70s and the 80s, they realized that these large tenement housing for the poor was a public disaster. So they were going to tear them down. And there was a sociologist from Northwestern who said, what we need to do is get these families into these middle-class townhomes. Well, the middle-class people didn't want these people in their townhomes. And so this went to the courts, and so what ended up happening was, what the courts ruled was that half of the families in the tenements would go to the south side of Chicago, which is the poor side of Chicago, and half would go to the GOTRO homes, which were 30 miles north of the south side of Chicago. So they would have no connection with their old friends and old families. They would have to be forced to reacclimate to a new neighborhood. And so in the 70s, what do you think things were like when white folks saw their new black neighbors from the hood coming into their townhome they're paying good money for, and these people are on welfare getting... What, you think there was welcome mats out, balloons, welcome here? We don't know all of what happened, but in reading the reports from the moms after and the dads after was, well, yeah, we got called the N-word and this, that, and the other thing, and to be honest, the first few months we brought ghetto with us. We did the late night partying and all that stuff, and so they were sort of right. But then they said, when we realized we were going to be evicted, it's like, I think I can put up with not having my music late at night and not doing my weekend parties, because I like this a whole lot better than that. And then over time, what ended up happening was Tommy and Johnny became friends, and Johnny said, Dad, Tommy is great at baseball. He can play shortstop. He's got an arm, and boy, he can hit the ball out of the park, Dad. It's like, well, great. We'll get him on the team. Well, he doesn't have enough money to be on the team. Okay. And so Dad would pay the money. Dad would give him the ride. And here's what they found out. They found out that 70% of the young men who moved to the GOTRO townhomes before age 8 or 9, 70% of them lived in middle-class neighborhoods better than the ones they grew up in. Here's what else they found. 50 to 60% of the parents were able to stay in those neighborhoods after the government subsidies ran out, Do you know why? Because the moms and dads, they go to the mailbox together, they start talking, hey, what do you do? It's like, man, you do hair? I know somebody who owns a beauty shop. Why don't you go talk to her? I'm going to give them a call. You know, what do you do? You know, I know a manager at Lowe's. Let me talk to them. And now, without government subsidies, because now they know somebody and somebody connected them, they're able to live in a middle-class neighborhood. So, I don't know what the answer is, but the best thing for these kids is to somehow get them out of these neighborhoods. I don't know if there's no easy answer for that, but that's something we need to think about, because those environments are toxic, and what we need to do is put them in positive environments and positive neighborhoods. Thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me share my stories, and appreciate your time this evening.
Is there any questions that you'd like to ask of him? He'd be happy to answer.
Sure.
Miss Ella, come on.
Here comes trouble.
They know me well, John. No, I just wanted to make a comment. I did volunteer at John's after-school program, and the kids were very well behaved, and they all smiled, and you could see the glow on their face, and that was very refreshing for me to see them being happy and stuff. There were a few that were a little handful, but I loved them before I walked in the door. I loved them after I walked out the door. And I disciplined them like I would discipline my own children. And thank you for that experience. Love Our Schools, if y'all don't know about that program, is going to be revamping 8 schools in the Lafayette Parish District. They are asking volunteers, they need thousands of volunteers to go on July 13th to 8 different schools to help paint. I don't know, there's a whole slew of things that you could be doing. So I encourage you to go to the Love Our Schools website and look it up and volunteer for that. If you cannot physically volunteer, if you have money you want to donate to the cause, it's a good way for us to give back to our community. On the education side, I had the pleasure of going to Eaton Park Elementary School in Abbeville Friday. I was blown away by what I saw at that school with the kids, pre-K kids, and how they held themselves up, how they spoke so eloquently. They have the Leader in Me program that they have implemented at that school, going on 3 years now. Amazing. I would encourage anyone to call the school, go take a tour of the school in Lafayette Parish. A lot of our elementary schools have the Leader in Me program, so do some of our middle schools. I'm trying to get my foot in the door to check out the programs here in our Lafayette Parish, because if I'm going to stomp the grounds for this program, which I was blown away with, I want it in my own backyard first. But I encourage y'all to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for giving us that talk. I used to be a school teacher. A lot of what you said I could identify with. Mentoring is a skill set that schools really don't have much time for. They're so busy with content, and you know, I had kids come to me sometimes, usually during my lunch break, and just want to talk, just want to talk. And you'd be surprised the stuff they would just tell you. Just like that. But I just want to ask a practical question. As far as funding goes, does the state of Louisiana in any way help y'all out with your budget?
So most of our funding comes from private benefactors who know who we are and support us. I never went to school to learn how to write grants, but we've written several grants and we've gotten grants. So we really have not done any federal or, we did a state grant once, and we will never do a state grant again. So, and we won't do a federal grant. The reporting and so on is just too onerous for a small organization like us. So we do get a grant from the city. We have gotten them a grant from the city. They do support some non-for-profits that work with at-risk youth, and but we have to apply for that every year. But no state funding. Most of it is through churches and individuals and grants. So thank you.
Is there any other question? Come on up, sir.
Hi, I'm Jim Dorey. John, I can kind of relate to some of the stories about the poverty and the whole notion of generational poverty. That's kind of some of my upbringing. And you're right, you need to have some good mentors and coaches and people that can inspire you and get you to a whole new place to be able to break that chain. And fortunately, my brother before me did that, and I was the beneficiary of some of the challenges he faced, and was able to continue on. Of course, went to college and have run a great business. You mentioned a few things that really struck me, and it's about young people and particularly very, very young people as they grow up. And I just wrote some things down. Just words like low self-esteem, low self-worth, low belief systems, lack of ability to make good and select good options, lack the ability to select good friends to be with. Lack someone in their life that really cares. They lack a safe environment, and they lack the ability to ask for help. A lot of those things describe what I was when I was really a young person and an introvert. And of course, things have changed for me, because I would never have been up here doing this. A couple of questions would be, you talked about the students and the young people that you come in contact with. Do you have a tracking system to follow them through high school or any other part of their lives at all?
So for a child to join our program, we have the parents sign all kinds of permission slips. So permission slips for us to be able to talk to the teachers and the principals, to get their test scores, to see their grades, see their discipline. So so we can do that. But the one thing with poverty is kids growing up in poverty, they're very transitory. So I would say that on average, kids are only in our neighborhood like 3 years. And it's not because they're going to a better neighborhood or a yard that's got a pool. Sometimes it's, it could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe mom lost her job, and if they lose their job, they don't have $600 to fall back on to pay next month's rent. So it's difficult to do long-term tracking. We have done a little bit of it, but our sample size is pretty small.
You could practice this, Dan, because I have a couple more questions for you, and if kind of follow-up questions. One would be, you mentioned partnering. Aside from financial partners, do you partner with any other organizations? You mentioned churches, but I'm interested in if you can give me a little more color on that. And I'd like to hear your opinion. Of course, right now in Baton Rouge, we're talking about the K-12 initiative. I don't necessarily think it's comprehensive enough from my beliefs. But can you do you have any thoughts on the K-12 initiative that we have in Baton Rouge?
I should be familiar with it, but I'm not. I do know that there is an initiative for early childhood education, and they're trying to find an additional $30 million for that, because there's 5,000 kids on a waiting list, and those kids, if they're not in early education, they're going to be on a different list when they're 18. So I think that's money well spent. I don't know why we wouldn't want to do $31 million. To me, with a state budget of what, 26 billion or something like that, 31 million that's like a rounding error. That's like chump change. Why would you argue about that? Find that money. The other thing I can't speak to right now, my focus is we work K through 8th grade, but our focus is getting them younger, and so we're going to work really hard over the summer to find kindergartners and first graders in our neighborhood. In the past, we haven't solicited. Kids and families just find out about us and they come. But we're going to start actively pursuing those kids because the sooner we get them, just the easier it is. So a dream for us down the road is we would like to figure out how to do preschool. Because what we're doing now, it helps, but man, preschool, that's the bomb. So if you can figure out how to do that, and I think Head Start seats in our town, I think we have 400 Head Start seats. That's not nearly enough. We've had parents and grandparents who have taken their kids to Abbeville and New Iberia to get into a Head Start program because they couldn't get a seat here. So your other question was partnerships. Right now, my main partnership I'm working with is churches, and what we are trying to do is get a black senior pastor and a white senior pastor getting together, doing a Bible study together, talking about poverty and issues like that, and just becoming friends over coffee and breakfast over a long period of time. And so the black pastor can talk about when desegregation happened and he went to the white school, what that was like, and the white pastor could talk about what it was like from his perspective, and just trying to start a dialogue. And the goal is to see those congregations getting together and processing things. But first, the pastors have to become friends. And the reason I'm focusing on that is when you look at the discourse in the public square, there's a lot of animus and mistrust and a lot of division, and it's interesting. I'm a Protestant, a conservative Protestant, but I'm a conservative Protestant white guy. You talk to a person who's religiously conservative Protestant black person, their politics are totally different. We read the same Bible, we believe in the same Jesus, but the politics are totally different. So who's right? Well, we have two different experiences and two different stories. And yelling at the other one saying you're wrong doesn't help. Let's find out what the experiences are. Let's become friends. And I think ultimately we all want the same thing. We want our kids to succeed. We want a better city. So, but we also work with the Junior League. They have a little grant funding cycle, and so we ask them to fund an event that they help us put on. Same thing with the Kiwanis Club, the Lafayette Kiwanis Club. They help us annually. Rotary North, they help us annually. Those organizations tend to help us with events. So if we have end of year party or a backpack event, then we give school supplies out to the new kids in our program. They help us with that. So we are trying to find other civic organizations that would love to come and encourage its members to help volunteer once a month or once a week. Or one of the things we're really focusing on now is STEM, and finding either two businesses are helping us by sending their employees to us for STEM. So CGI and Waiter are giving us volunteers from their corporations to help teach our kids once a week and teaching them about robotics.
John, what's your contact information?
Okay, I have a brochure in the back, and I think my contact information's on the brochure in the back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Don't be shy. It seemed like a few of you had questions at this table. Don't be shy.
You're doing a good job.
Yes, that's
Great
awesome.
job.
Very good.
In summation, would you like to give us some advice on what possibly we can do in an organization, whether we have 30 or 40 members or whatever?
Yeah. So a new phrase that has come to me is a phrase, intentional inclusion. Okay? So Jesus talks about loving your neighbor, and if you know the story of the Good Samaritan, Samaritans and Jews didn't like each other. They didn't trust each other, and just a little bit before Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan, he told people at a party that he was at. The Pharisees threw a party, they invited Jesus, and he looked around, and everybody at the table was Pharisees. And he said to them, you guys, come on. When you throw a party, invite people who can't invite you back. Invite the blind, invite the lame, invite invite the social outcasts. And so I guess what my suggestion would be is let's go. It's okay that we feel more comfortable with people who look like us and share our values, but I think we lack something. These kids, they have taught me more than I've taught them. These kids are so generous. You know, with Halloween candy, my kids, they would put all their Halloween candy in Ziploc bags. They would name what it was, you know, Sweet Tarts or Tardies or Snicker bars, and then they would put the number of Snicker bars that were in there. So, and if they woke up and there were 4 Snicker bars, but the paper said 6, at breakfast times, like, who took my Snickers bar? You owe me. And we would have those conversations after Halloween. These kids, if you put your hand in to take the candy out of their Halloween basket, they're like, no, here, Mr. Taniel, take some. We do a Christmas store, and we encourage our kids to have a generous gift, and we tell them it's not all about you. We have several kids that they don't buy a thing for themselves. They buy for their brother, their sister, they buy for everybody else. These are loving kids, these are generous kids, and they've taught us so much. And I think we're not, by befriending them and building relationships with people like them, it's not so I can help you out. God has created us interdependent. Interdependent. And there are things that the poor can teach us that our money has blinded us from. Our money and our self-sufficiency, loyalty, friendship, generosity, those are the currency of the poor. And if you want to be a friend, you want to be taught about friendship, talk to them. And so I would encourage you, intentional inclusion. Add some chocolate chips to the vanilla ice cream here. Invite some people who don't look like you and have these discussions with them in your presence. Learn from each other, and let's build a better, more civil society through friendship and loving our neighbor who isn't like us.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here this evening. A round of applause is certainly more than deserving. Thank you very much. And an announcement, we'll have a meeting 2 weeks from tonight. We have, I think, a candidate that'll be running for the House of Representatives, and we'd certainly like for you all to come out. There's also information, Mike, you have some information that we want to try to deliver to people that were here concerning
Al made the announcement.
That's what I'm talking about.
I'll just repeat what he said.
Yeah, that's good enough.
The funeral service for Frank Flynn is going to be at St. Mary's, June 22nd at 12 o'clock for Frank Flynn, our former deceased Vice President.
Vice President.
Vice President.
Correct. Okay.
Quitting is not an option.
Quitting
is not an option.
Oh, you like that, you know? He's captured on that. Somebody told me that a long time ago. The older I get, the more that statement is so true. It's unreal. Thank you very much, and we enjoyed you being here. And in 2 weeks, we'll have a program with Lafayette to come out. Okay? Thank you very much.